to 411 T Street, unfiltered conversations on mental health and the issues in society that impact us all. This is where we break down the barriers and explore the topics that intersect with the challenges of modern society. I'm Dr. Milan Bray, and each week we'll dive into raw, honest discussions on the systemic issues that affect us all. We'll hear from experts, thought leaders, and everyday people offering real stories and actionable insights to help you achieve an understanding of the issues that matter most. No filters, no sugarcoating, just real talk. Welcome to 411 T Street. Joining me today is Alan. That's a word. Alan, not hard. Williams. Thank you so much for joining me. Alan comes from us. I met him through World Values Day. His whole platform is about values-driven leadership and life. I apparently need far more coffee or something.
It's early for you.
It's not that early.
I'm giving you an out.
I do appreciate you having my back on this one, though. Oh my gosh, I swear. It's the blonde hair. Anyway, welcome to the show. Yeah, maybe we should start editing. I feel like this might be one of those times. Okay, so when do you when we talk about values, I think you and I are probably very much on the same page about what values looks like and why we need it. But for our audience, please do enlighten them.
Well, thanks for the great introduction, Milan. And values, yeah, it's an interesting one because a lot of people in the values space seems to me that they make out that values are like this panacea of loveliness and everything is wonderful. And I don't see it like that very much at all, actually, because if we go to the other end of that scale, I think values actually is a really helpful, practical handrail in a life that is often messy and dirty. And so it's more like a guiding compass than it is this thing about being wonderful all of the time.
Uh, yes. Because in my perspective, a values-driven life is not easy.
Dead right. And well, the first point is that you need to understand what's important to you or your values in the first place, right? And so how can you expect to make decisions according to what's important to you if you don't know what's important to you? And I saw some research recently that estimated that approximately two-thirds of people have never done any work on their values. So if that's true, it's hardly any surprise that organizations, for instance, struggle to put their organizational values into life in a meaningful way because their employees don't really get it in the first place. So it seems to me there's a really big piece of education missing right at the beginning there.
Yeah, I mean, every corporation, every school has their values mantra, right? It's either slapped on a website or on a wall or somewhere like that. And I do see that being out of alignment in many cases. I'm really shocked and a little saddened by that statistic. But also when we talk about values, I think we all do have values. I think the challenge is maybe that what we value is not very valuable.
Well, so that's an interesting way of looking at it. I'm not so sure that well, we do all have values, like you say, but people, it seems, don't want to or don't understand why it's valuable, sorry, pun not intended, to actually get closer to all of that. But Roy Disney, there's a quote by him. He said, when you understand your values, decisions are easy. And I absolutely support that. But unless you're clear about it, you can't go through the thought process to arrive at a decision. I was on a podcast, it's a few years ago actually, but somebody said, do your values compete with each other? And I tend to think in stories rather than theory. And so I found myself saying, just imagine this guy. He's got a partner and they've got a newborn baby, and he's got two core values. One is family,
Mhm.
and the other is peace. So he's a pacifist. He's out of work, no money coming in, and he's offered a job in an ammunition factory. So what does he do? And he goes through the thought process of, I don't really want to work in an ammunition factory, but I need to feed my partner and our new child. So I am going to take that job. And that provides food on the table. But for every minute of the day that I'm not working at that job, I'm going to find another one because I hate working there and I don't want to work there for very long. But by going through that thought process, because he's aware of what his values are, he's
Mhm.
able to arrive at a decision and be comfortable with what he's decided to do. Whereas many of us, and I use it in the My 31 Practices book, I use the analogy of a boat on the ocean. Many of us just get tossed from one wave to another, react and respond. And so it's hardly any surprise that we go way off course. Whereas if you understand your values, you're going in a certain direction and you accommodate or deal with everything that's thrown at you, but it doesn't put you off course.
I like that's a great way to look at it. I there was a I guess you want to call him a guru, but a teacher from India, Sri Ravi Shankar, and somebody was asking him. I happened to be watching a video, and somebody asked him, "How do you know if you're making the right decision?" And he said, or the wrong decision, as the case may be. And he said, when the answer moves from the heart to the head, you know it's wrong. And I was like, ooh, okay, because we start to think, and um we there's so much chatter around it, but we know our truth. We know our what sits with our heart. But I think you're right. I think there's a lot of people who don't really understand what that means. But I also believe that values need to have some fundamentals. For example, when I teach children about values, we start with the value of love as the seed that grows all other values: truth, peace, right conduct, and nonviolence. And within that value of love, we don't talk to children about it being romantic or friend or pet. It's not any of that. We talk about it being two things: unconditional and selfless service to others. And there's about 26 adjectives that we use underneath that: compassion, acceptance, empathy, caring, sharing, those kinds of things. So I think also within the space of values, we can have our truth, right? But there also needs to be some fundamental truths to what are good human values.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues is that we use words, particularly values words, very freely without much thought and consideration, and without much understanding of what we mean when we use them. And that's why, I mean, a few years ago, I co-created the Values Jam card game, which does just that, encourages conversations, values-led conversations. And you mentioning children, every October, I do a Values Jam challenge. So I look to have 31 Values Jams during the month in celebration of World Values Day. And not this year, but last year, the 1st of October was a Sunday. So I was going to visit my grandson, who was then 5. And I thought, I wonder if I could play Values Jam with him. But because a lot of the words are grown up words, he's not going to know them. So I was like, how do I do this? So what I did when I got there, I showed him the cards. There are 60 of them. And I said, right, Jacob, what we're going to do, I'm going to read out these words and you tell me if you know the word or you don't know the word. That's the first thing we're going to do. So then we had the smaller pile of words that he did know. And then I got him to force rank. So I was like, Jacob, do you prefer family or excitement? Which is your favorite? And so we went through that process. His final three favorites were love, and this, you mentioned it, so this is what brought the story into my mind, kindness and beauty. And so when he said those three, I said to him, so Jacob, can you explain to me what love means? And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, no, I can't. I
Oh,
said, well, that's okay. That's okay. But can you give me an example of what you do for people that you love? And he just still straight in my eyes, he said, I give them a hug. And it's just like, oh,
so
but
cute.
unless we explore it, unless we discuss these things, we're nowhere.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the world has moved to loving things and using people. So I think it gets harder to define what love is because and I did a talk on this. It seems like love, the concept of love now is on like the sliding scale. And oftentimes the things that we should love and put our attention to get less attention. And the things that we, I don't say shouldn't love, but seem to be less important, we focus more attention on. And I think as the world um, becomes more connected in the space of, capitalistic Western ideologies kind of permeating many different cultures, I think those fundamentals that held so true in so many countries that were united by family and ideology and tradition. I think it's getting really eroded, and I think a lot more people are focused on the other stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there's another dimension to that, which I'm not sure whether it's included in what you said or if it's separate, but it's this obsession with speed and productivity and all of that. Um, I was in Sicily recently, attending the World Kindness Movement General Assembly, and I stayed on to celebrate a birthday, and we visited some places on the coast. And just to stand there with your feet in the sand and feel the water come in over your feet. And actually, I enjoy taking a video just of the sea because I love the sound of the sea just lapping. And then listening to that for 10 seconds or whatever it is. And there are so many people that, for whatever reason, don't seem to have the time to enjoy moments like that. And that's a sadness.
I lived in Paris for a while, and I remember sitting in. I'm assuming you've been to Paris.
Yep.
You're very very close. Just a train away. But in the Louvre, there's the square there where the glass triangle
Yep.
is for people who've not been there. Um, and in that, I would go almost every day with my little dog Leah, and I'd sit there and I would take it in. I was in Paris, for heaven's sakes. It's like, and one of my favorite cities on the planet. And I remember sitting there and just really looking, because although there's lovely art in the Louvre, if you sit in that square and you look up and you look around, the statues and the intricacies of just the architecture in the square is stunning. But I also observed people in that time because, like I said, I went almost every day with Leah, and I saw so many people look at that square through a lens.
Mhm.
I don't think I saw, I, I mean, I genuinely cannot tell you one person that I saw that was not looking at it through their phone. They were taking videos, they were there was these different places, camera, good camera spots, right? And I just literally, I just saw people like this, and I thought, you're missing the moment.
Dead right. And
Like, what
it's
are you gonna do? Go revisit Paris when you get home?
yeah, that's the thing, right? And it's the words coming into my mind are consumption and record versus experience. And I'm, on the photography piece, I'm a bit guilty of this because I'm a keen photographer. And so I do like to get the nice shots, but that doesn't mean to say that it's a substitute for having the experience as well. And a few months ago, I was lucky enough to go on it was owl photography day. So the owls were captive, but they were let out in this woodland so that you could get really cool photographs. Um, but there was one moment I remember it so clearly that this beautiful barn owl was gliding through the trees, and I didn't even raise my lens because I just wanted to watch there was no noise, and it just glided in between the trees and below the boughs or above another bough. It was just magical. And I've still got that video in my head, right? So I didn't need to lift the camera for that. And I can't show it to anybody else, but who cares?
I had not exactly a similar experience because there were no animals involved, but I went to Prague. I never took one photo, not one.
Okay.
What I did was I'm a tactile kinesthetic musical learner. So what I did was I put on my headphones and I had a soundtrack. I'm not going to tell you what soundtrack it is because people will be like, "What? Why is she listening to that?"
Oh, you've got to tell us
Okay,
now.
I'll tell you. It was to Coyote Ugly, the soundtrack to the movie Coyote Ugly. Anyway, it's a good soundtrack. Anyway, and this also dates, this was a while ago that I went. But I put in my headphones and I walked this. There was not one day that I never took a bus, I never took a taxi, I never took any sort of public transportation. I walked every single day. I cannot tell you how many miles I put in because I did not track it. I did not use my camera, did not use my phone, and I just listened to that music. And I can tell you that every time I hear that music, I immediately go back to Prague.
Yeah, of course you will. Yeah. And it's similar and different to yours. So two stories. One, I was in Barcelona, and I like when I go to places, I do like to do some planning, but
Hmm.
then some of the time I like to just get lost
Oh,
and
brilliant.
just take a turning, go somewhere else. And it was quite early in the morning, maybe 8:30, something like that. And I'd been lost for about 20 minutes. And then I turned a corner and there was a film crew and a couple of dancers, Basque dancers.
Oh my
And they
gosh.
were just amazing. And their costumes looked brilliant. And I got some good photos. But it was like, oh, thank you, whoever made that happen. That
Mm.
was one. And then the other one that I've just remembered is in the south of France. It might have been Montpellier or somewhere like that. And again, just went and got lost. It felt like quite a rough area. And again, turned a corner, and there were two teenage boys with red boxing gloves on fighting each other. And behind them was a big graffiti on the wall. And so I've got this shot
Oh,
of a
wow.
guy extended with his red glove, the other guy being hit, and then this graffiti on in the background. And
Cool.
it's like you couldn't plan these things, if you'd like to.
I travel like you. I don't I don't know that I've ever truly had an itinerary. I just go as the way opens. I walk. I love to walk. I've been to Barcelona. That is one of the most amazing cities to walk. Um, I lived there for 2 months. Absolutely. I don't really go on vacation. I go live somewhere. So,
Okay,
um,
lucky lady.
yeah, I find it to be, I don't know. I just can't even imagine how people get anything out of a week. And I know, unfortunately, that's another value too. Like in the United States, people get a week off or 2 weeks off. That's not enough time to find, space and balance in your life to really enjoy something. It's like this very quick, like, we've got to go to Paris. We have a week to do it. It's like we don't value that kind of slowing down and the connection. And part of that is being a low context culture where we value the autonomy and, the hustle. And I don't think that's serving our it's obviously not serving our mental health. We have just exorbitant drug addiction and incarceration rates, right? So we are proving that it is not supporting our mental health. But these kinds of things, finding the space to just enjoy life and truly embrace it. And not everybody has the luxury of going off for 2 months. I get that I'm blessed, but I've also sacrificed some very big things to have the kind of life that I've chosen to live. It's not for everybody, but but it's not even about that. It's about really finding that work-life balance. Like your grandson said, what do you value? Love, beauty, those kinds of things. I think we as humans, so many of us have moved away from that.
Yeah, but I think that the key word you've used is chosen. And for me, ultimately, that's all it's about is choice, right? We have that choice. But it seems oftentimes people seem to think they no longer have that choice. They've got to take that big job because of the pay rise, but why? And I was asking people over the last few years about the difference between the known and the unknown. And we tend to be obsessed with the known. Our goals are about this is what the plan is, this is what I know is going to happen, or I think I know. And that's all a false sense of security compared to the unknown. And I said to people, okay, so if you think of all that is as being 100%, what do you think the known is as a percentage? And what do you think the unknown is as a percentage? And well, let me ask you that question. What do you think? What would be your view of the split?
Oh God, the unknown is everything. I mean, people plan
Okay,
and God
how far are
laughs.
you going to go?
I mean, truth, and this is something I teach children, truth is abstract. It changes from moment to moment. So there are very few infinite truths. And for me, an infinite truth would be God, right? That constant. So as somebody who's lived a very untethered life, I can assure you that there are very few things that, as try as I might, that you can control, that I can control. So I would say 99.9999
There you go. There you go.
infinite percent.
So the person who has estimated the known at the highest level that I've ever heard is 10%. So if that's true, if it's no more than 10%, and many people have said what you've said, why do we obsess with it rather than jumping into the 90% where often you find brilliant things?
Yeah, I think from the psychology standpoint, I think it's because when you look at, for example, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that foundational component is stability and security. And I think we're all wanting to feel stable and secure. And so we try to find ways to root ourselves in that, but there really isn't a way to do that because nothing is particularly stable and secure. Like we can think that, but yeah, like maybe you get to go home home to your house every day, but that's not even a guarantee, God forbid something happens, or I think we're just all one moment, one paycheck, one step, one whatever away from the unknown. And I think about, my dad was a really great example of that. He was very rooted in, my father was very rooted into trying to control life. And his mantra was always tomorrow, when I get the bills paid off, when I get the car paid off, when the house is paid off, blah, 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 blah. You know, he went to work one day and he never came home. Um, it's a very tragic story. He got hit by a train on my birthday. Not a good story, but but his life ended in obviously not a way that he could have ever predicted, right? So he every single moment was trying to control the narrative, and then it ended. And that's, I don't, that's not a story to tell people to be like, oh my God, that's horrible. It is horrible, but the horrible part of that story is he never got to live his life.
Yeah, I've got a similar one, not as tragic. Well, how can you say it's not as tragic? It is for the guy that I'm going to tell you about. I used to run hotels and conference centers and stuff, and he was my food and beverage director. Uh, Brilliant, brilliant French guy. And several years later, he called me to let me know that his wife, who he'd been married to for maybe over a decade, something like that, had died when she was 40 something.
Mm.
So, and we were talking about it, and he was explaining how he's so grateful that he ever knew her and had that much time with her. And so, in that way, he was kind of rejoicing.
Mhm.
But his big, big regret was that they had planned to do so much when they retired. And that's a lesson for us all, right? That, you exactly like you've described, and I'm so sorry to hear that story, but you don't know when it's going to be.
No, we genuinely don't. Um, Yeah, it is a valuable lesson about choosing things that matter, choosing things that matter. But I guess the question that I would have for you in living a values-based life and having values-based leadership, it's not easy. And if change were easy, everybody would do it, right? But but in your recommendation, how can people really start to understand their value structure, and within doing that, how can they make those steps forward in living a values driven life?
Yeah. Well, like you, I think you said some time ago, it's not for everyone. And what I'm about to describe, I think people should just consider what's right for them and what's not, because you can't just be force-fed something like this in this space. You need to find your own way. So that's the first most important thing. There are surveys out there, for instance, that you can do to give yourself a head start. So take them, but don't think that you're going to get the right answer. To treat them with a bit of disrespect. One of the ways in which I think is most effective to really start to understand your values and what's important to you is to think about times, two different times. One, when you have felt just on top of the world, when everything has felt brilliant and you're in flow. The reason why is probably because your core values are being activated, they're in play, and that's why things feel so good. And it's also true, the opposite side of that. So when have you been really angry, annoyed, pissed off, excuse the language, because then your values will have been trampled on. And so, if you think about your life in those ways and specific incidents, and then delve deep into, well, why were you so upset then? What was it that was triggering you? And that time when everything was so brilliant, what was going on? What made you feel so good? Those are really, really helpful ways to help you understand what's important to you and your values. Um, but I have to say, I think it's overstated knowing what your values are, because if that's where you stop, you haven't gone halfway far enough. And for me, what you need to do is then ask yourself the question, how am I going to translate that into concrete, observable behaviors? And how am I going to make that a part of the way that I am? So let me give you a practical example. If you said to me, oh, Alan, compassion is one of my core values. It's really, really important to me. Well, that's fine, but it's quite an abstract concept, compassion, right? And so I would ask you, how does that manifest itself? What is something concrete, even small, that you can do that would bring to life that value of compassion for you? And you might think about it, and then you might say, well, do you know what? Offering help to a stranger, that's a really good way to bring that to life. And so I would then encourage you to practice that practice and make a conscious choice to do that. And so the My 31 Practices model is exactly that. It's called 31 practices because there's no more than 31 days in a month. And it's a process that takes you through identifying your values and then using a creative thought process to identify very practical behaviors like offering help to a stranger. And then you consciously practice just one each day. And the neuroscience behind it is that the repeated conscious practice embeds the behavior. And then by definition, you're living your values. And if you invest your time consciously in doing those things, you haven't got space for the other things, right? So that's the key. Don't waste the time on stuff that's not important to you. Focus on what is.
I love that. One thing I do, and I think this is so important, the follow through. So with the Tay Academy, although we do teach children the love, truth, peace, right conduct, nonviolence, and the sub values that go underneath that, the Tay Academy, the thread of the Tay Academy is um, the integrity component. And when I teach integrity, it's the alignment with your thoughts, your words, and your deeds. And I've said to, many people, and I think that's the part of values-based or social emotional learning based education is people think, well, if we teach compassion or we teach empathy, then they get it. But you can be empathetic and you can be compassionate and not have integrity.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't, one is, you don't get one and get the other. It is a practice, right? So we have to think about being compassionate and we have to speak about being compassionate. We got to go out and be compassionate and whatever that looks like. So I really like that idea. And also just within the space of, I mean, everybody's different. They say that to change a habit, it takes 23 days or 27 days or whatever the situation is. But I think everybody is different. Everybody's brain, depending upon your generational trauma and your trauma triggers and all of that stuff, it could take longer than that to certainly unravel something. So you have to really be mindful and patient with yourself. If after 31 days you're like, I'm not getting it, well, there might be something else going on that you really also need to work on. So, but changing those habits and doing those things consistently as you said, they start to change those neurosynaptic connections. And once we
Yeah.
do that, it becomes easier and easier and easier. So, um, I love the idea of putting something small into practice, even if it's little, just making sure you smile at someone every day.
Yeah, can be as simple as that. And I think hats off to you for the work that you do with children because this is such an important time for them. And I'm just putting the My 31 Practices program into in the UK. It's a secondary school, so ages sort of 17, 18 years old. And this is a hypothetical story and it needs to be translated, which might take a little bit of work. But the education system in the UK is that you specialize on a limited number of subjects from 16 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go to university,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what often happens is this. Hey, Milan, you're really good at science subjects. You're 16. And what you need to do is take physics and chemistry and maths for your A levels. And that means that you'll be able to go to a really good engineering university and become an engineer. So 16-year-old Milan says, okay. takes those subjects, gets the grades, gets into a good engineering university, becomes an engineer, does a graduate program, gets promoted, gets headhunted, and then looks around at 30 odd saying, how on earth did I get here? This is not me. Now, imagine the alternative. Imagine at 16 instead, if the teacher has said, Milan, you're a really important time in your life now as you transition into adulthood. And so we're going to awaken you to the power of your values. And what we're going to encourage you to do is make your choices and decisions based on them. Don't listen to other people too much. And I bet you'd end up in a better place.
Oh gosh, I feel curious about what the statistic is about people who, I mean, when you're 16, 17, 18, 19, I mean, you're still an adolescent until you're 24. Let's just start there. Your
Yep.
brain is developing. The 20s are about figuring out who we are. How in
Yep.
God's green earth can we know what we want to be at 16? I mean, I wanted to be okay. First of all, I'm going to preface this with I loved the show Bewitched. But when I was in third grade, when we had to say what we wanted to be when we grow up, I drew a witch. And I'm gonna let you know that did not go over well with Sister Marianne. I think from their point, I think my permanent record always had that on there. Like, watch this one. But from there, I wanted to be a singer, and then I wanted to be an actress, and then I wanted to be a supermodel, and then I wanted to be a lawyer, and then I wanted to be a Spanish teacher, and then and the only reason that I got into psychology was not because of me, but because I was so confused about what I wanted to be that someone said, "Hey, you're a good listener. You should be a psychologist." And then one day I woke up and I'm like, uh, ugh. I have my own problems. I don't want to listen to yours. So, even through all of that, like look, I didn't even end up there, right? So I love the idea of, and obviously, love the idea because I'm working on it, but I really do love the ideas of having this values-based education because I think the way that the education system is structured, not just in the UK, but in the United States, it's so antiquated.
For
Like it's
sure.
just so like, really? We're still doing that? Like, just doesn't seem
And
to.
it's no longer fit for purpose, Milan, because of the big thing that's changed is that the speed of change is now just like so fast compared to what it was before. So, 50 years ago, you could acquire some knowledge either in law or finance, for instance, and that would serve you well for a lifetime career.
Mhm.
Whereas now, we don't know the jobs that are going to be existing in 5 years or 10 years' time. So, in the absence of knowledge being any longer the key thing that we can hang our hat on, and the unknown being something that we have to navigate, values is the only answer for me. If you're very clear about what's important to you, that will guide you towards the sort of knowledge you want to acquire, the new skills you want to acquire as they develop. But without them, you can be lost.
Well, 100%. And look at all the top companies are already saying that emotional intelligence is and all the research says emotional intelligence is the driving force and factor of success. It's not about your knowledge and your IQ. Yes, that has some part, but they're looking for people who are team players. They're looking for people who are creative. They're looking for people who have that moral compass that points north. So, and I just, again, I just don't think kids can reliably say what they want to be forever and ever and ever. Um, but also, what is the statistic? And I don't know exactly what it is, but in a lifetime, I heard, is it like you change your job like 14 different times or something
Yeah,
like that?
I've no idea what it is currently. It's a lot more than it used to be. I think that's fair to say, right?
Let me ask Google because I feel curious. How many times in a lifetime do people change their jobs?
According to Novoresume, the average person will change careers 5 to 7 times during their working life. Approximately 30% of the total workforce will now change jobs every 12 months.
Oh, okay. So this number seems a little bit low. It says five to seven times, but it's also saying that 30% of the workforce changes their job every 12 months.
Yeah. I wonder if you asked it to predict how often people will, how many times people will change their jobs in the future.
Predict how many times people will change their job in the future. Oh, you've asked it to do something it is not capable of. It just gave me the same answer. But there's another one said that research found that workers stay with one employer for an average about 4 years, holding down 12 jobs in a lifetime. So that's different research.
Yeah,
But I think within that, uh, these new generations are probably going to change jobs predictably more often. We're already kind of seeing that. And I think a lot of people too, a lot of the kids coming up, not all of them, of course, but I think a lot of them are also looking for that kind of fast way to earn money, whether it's through being an influencer or a YouTuber or, so some sort of social media, something or other. I don't think people are really looking to sit in a desk
yeah,
and
I think that's right.
you
The,
know
tra the traditional job and even the concept of an organization, I think, is being questioned now. You see much more in the way of partnerships and collaborations and groups of people being brought together for a short period of time to get something done, rather than this kind of more like like dinosaur times, really. This is our
Mhm.
structure, and this is how many people we need. But then by tomorrow, the circumstances have changed, so that's no longer something that you can be approaching it with.
Yeah, 100%. It's a very uncertain world, and I am grateful that I got to grow up when I did because there was a lot more known than unknown in my time, and I also had the opportunity to just more or less. I mean, there was a lot of turmoil in my background, but I also got the opportunity to play and be creative and to think about, again, I want to be a witch. I want to be I want to be a saint. Like, it was fine to do that. It was fine to be creative and silly and fun and all of those kinds of things. Nobody was putting pressure on me to not be a witch, as the case may be. I mean, apart from Sister Mary Ann, she was probably wholly against that, but literally HOL and WHOLL. Anyway, yeah, but I want to circle back on your idea as we kind of round things out because I think your suggestion and your work that you do about that the inception point of change and doing the little things for 31 days. So can we help the audience kind of understand one, your work, where they can find this work, and then, the steps that the impactful steps that they can start to change to lead a more values-driven life.
Yeah, so I think I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and it was as a direct result of your invitation to join you at the Values and Volunteering event. Because when I started to think about that, I realized that it all began when I was 17 years old. I was a member of something called Friends of the Earth, which is an environmental movement, and is probably less known now than it was then. And in my home city, we created a program that matched people who had a garden but didn't want to work it with people who didn't have a garden and wanted one. And we had 20 pairs, so not a massive scheme, but people, both sides, were absolutely delighted with the scheme that we set up. And what thinking about the talk that I gave at your event made clear for me was that That was the beginning of what I do now, which is basically creating value where there wasn't any before, and the model or the concept that you create being values driven. And that's it. And when I started to think about that very simple model and apply it to the work that I do with corporate organizations or with individuals or with communities, it it rings true, irrespective of the variety of the setting. So, for instance, I'm involved with Voices of Tomorrow. This is an initiative to give youth around the world a voice, because nearly half of the population in the world is under 30 years old, compared to 2.6% of government leaders who are under 30 years old. So there's a massive disconnect between the people running the show and the people on the receiving end of it. So we devised this concept whereby we invite young people to express their vision of the future through the creative arts. We're then going to put that through AI to translate it into sentiment and data, and then give it to the people that are responsible for designing tomorrow's society and ask them to do a better job than they're doing at the moment with that data. 31 Practices helps leaders in organizations translate their stated values on the wall into the practical lived behavior of their employees so that their organization is perceived better by all stakeholders. And then you remember the tsunami, another bad news thing, but chatting with friends, we wanted to help. And so somebody said, "Oh, what about a cake day?" And it's like, oh, for goodness sake, no, that's so much time and effort and so little reward. So what we did was created a model where the local tennis club played the local cricket club at soccer, and each of the members of the team had to be sponsored to a minimum amount of money. And we raised just over £5,000 in just over a week.
Oh, wow.
So it's these and again, I'm not making out that that's a massive project, but what I am saying is that we created value when there was none previously by a clever values-driven model or concept. So I think for anybody listening, I think the starting point is what's important to you. Then how can you do stuff, whatever it is, whether it's in your social life or whether it's in your work life, absolutely in support of those things that are important to you, and just trust in that rather than feel that you have to be driven by societal norms. And that I've taken many years to have the confidence to do that, but I'm so pleased that that's what I'm now doing.
I love that. It's the ancient proverb of the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. And I think if we all just give ourselves the grace and space to take that first step and know that, even that first step might be a little bit tumultuous, but we change to incite change, we need to move forward. And so I think that's a fantastic way to do that. So I appreciate that. And I'd love to, for our next G100 Leadership Summit, we're going to be working a lot with youth. This is going to be a youth leadership summit. So, on the side of that, to the side, we can maybe have a conversation about bringing some of the things that you do with youth and leadership and values driven with our next summit coming up in October 2025.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
Because
And you talking about small steps, I've got a suggestion for you to consider. I think you need to buy a broomstick.
listen, I love the show and the movie Bewitched. That's all I'm going to say about that. I don't want people to think that I got some things going on there. I just thought it was so cool that she could change everything just by wiggling her nose. It's like, that's all. It wasn't the fashion. She was just cool. Sabrina was cool. Or Samantha. No, wait, what was her name? Oh my God. Was it
I
Sabrina?
can't remember.
Samantha? I can't
I
remember.
think it was probably about the same time that David Carradine was Kung Fu Kid or something, and he was my
Yes.
hero.
Right? And you probably wanted to be him because it was
Yeah,
cool. Yeah.
yeah.
No. Hey, you know what? We all need a hero.
That's
Might
true.
just happen to be on a broom. I own it. I own my weirdness. Anyway, well, thank you so much. And how can people find your book and your work and all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, well, probably LinkedIn. If you put in Alan Williams, put in Service Brand as well. That's my company name, and there are a lot of Alan Williamses in the world probably. And then I have a website which is servicebrandglobal.com and valuesjam.com and other websites as well. But LinkedIn is probably a good place to start.
Perfect. Well, we will be sure to put that in the box underneath the video so people can easily find you. But thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the conversation. It was very meaningful for me, and I hope that we can inspire others to join this values-driven life. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into 411 T Street, where we spill the tea on the stories that matter the most. Transformation isn't a single moment. It's the clarity and insight that drives meaningful change and connects us all. If today's episode struck a chord, hit subscribe and share. Let's keep these conversations flowing and inspire real movements. 411 T Street. Get the info, spill the truth, spark the change.